About 25 years ago, I went to a meeting of a group called the Social Venture Network, which was just forming. And I met there Ben Cohn of Ben & Jerry's Ice Cream and Anita Roderick, who founded The Body Shop. And I spent this whole time being so impressed and thinking how amazing that Ben could figure out how to buy from local cows and give 7% back of his profits and be so transformational as an ice cream maker, and Anita as basically a cosmetics seller. And then I thought, so bad that I'm stuck in this business, real estate, what can you do with real estate? And it took me a couple months to wake up and go, wait a minute, they're selling fat and sugar and cosmetics we don't need, and real estate is where people live, and it's the essential thing, and it actually has such an extraordinary role to play in the transformation of this world. It's just that nobody had ever framed it as real estate as an opportunity, but it's an extraordinary opportunity. You all received this weekend the behavioral economics baseline study we sent you by John Gowdy. I am going to walk us through some key points from it, and then if we have time, we can actually discuss them. All right? But this is really some critical research. Garrison Institute spent about 1.5 years actually looking at all kinds of behavioral science and economics, and our thesis was economics is really the study of how people assess risk and how people assign value, and that leads to prices. And if we're going to figure out how we're going to create a greener world, we need to understand how that happens. And what became very clear very early on is that, in fact, the traditional economics of theories about how we do that is completely false. So I begin actually with this quote: "Only economists still put the cart before the horse by claiming that the growing turmoil of mankind can be eliminated if prices are right. The truth is that only if our values are right will the prices also be right." And it turns out there is no such thing as pure prices. We'll begin to go through that. There are no such thing as pure markets. There's no such thing as pure transparency. And that human behavior and human values shape everything. So what's been happening in economics is that economic theories are consistently not working, the new traditional ones. So they keep creating new ones that also have not worked. And they call these things anomalies. And in this study, it gives you a whole history about utility theory and these anomalies, which begin to show the failure of classical economics. What part of the problem is that what we've learned is that the human mind actually processes information different than computers does, and inserts values and emotion and a bunch of other things. And as John mentioned, the body, when we say it's a gut feeling, as John was saying, we actually have enough neurons in our gut. They actually make decisions for us, and they actually think. And when you say, I feel it in my heart, your heart is actually, there's enough neurons there that they are actually doing thinking. And behavioral, the theory of classical economics was that you didn't have to understand any of this, because if you looked at a market, and the market was a sum of people, and a market moved one way, it really didn't matter how people got there. It was just the outcome. They all moved in that direction. Except the markets are never performing rationally, and what we're learning is that it is actually useful to know how people make these decisions. What has emerged as a field in the last 10 or 15 years called behavioral economics, and behavioral economics looks at actually how humans behave, and a field called neuroeconomics, which look at how people are wired neurologically to assess risk and assign value and to respond to economic stresses. And these two fields are dramatically changing and informing what economics is, or the conclusions of economics. So in neoclassical, what's called welfare economics, there were two fundamental theorems. So the first one is called the first fundamental theorem, and it's a powerful result of axioms of consumer choice and calculus of constrained maximization. That means constrained, and there's always constraints. Systems are bounded, they have boundaries. And it says that individuals always want to maximize the outcomes. So people always go for the maximum profit. They'll want to buy things at the lowest price and sell it at the highest price. And if you just have markets that put buyers and sellers together, the outcome result will be the right price. And by getting prices right, it'll maximize what's best for society. It will allocate goods in the maximum way. And what we've seen time and time again is that's not true. There is not transparency. You don't get best prices. And certainly, when it comes to what is best for society, maximizing best prices or maximizing gross national product has nothing to do with the quality of life. So for example, do this thought experiment. If you, so imagine a society in which 90% of the people have cancer and 10% of them are taking care of them. In that society, it's a very, very, very expensive time. GDP would go up enormously. That's a terrible society to live in. So GDP maximization actually has very little, and there are a lot of studies now that show that once people leave a certain comfort level of food and education and safety and security, that no matter how much more the GDP goes up, their happiness in some cases actually goes down. Excuse me for a second, I'm going to get to the... Okay, so some other just issues with the classical model. The first is, it says individual well-being is measured by income and social welfare is measured by the sum of individual income. So I just discussed that. The idea summing income for GDP, et cetera, is a reflection of how healthy or well-off a society is, and how that the sum means that all individuals are doing better. We know that that's probably not true. Economics is also based on the discount model, that you discount, and the markets are always discounting future income, and it presumes that that is being done, that future income is worth less than current income. The standard model is static. It has no it's not a systems model. It has no dynamic effects. It has no influences from one aspect of life to another. So they began to actually discredit these with game theories. And three of the classic games are described in here. I'm going to just describe one, which is called the ultimatum game. So the way the ultimatum game works, and this game has now been played for, I believe, 25 years in literally millions of cases in almost every culture around the world. Anthropologists have taken it all over the place. And it's a very simple game. And the way it goes is I go, say, to Susan, and I say, here's $10. And Susan, you can keep it or divide it however you like with John. And John has only, your decision, Susan, is how much you're going to split with John. And John's decision is how much you're going to take. Now, under classical economics, if Susan says, I'm keeping 9, and John, you get 1, John should take the offer because $1 is better than have nothing. He says no, he has nothing. He says yes, he's got 1. And Susan, as a maximizer, has to try and figure out, like, what's the maximum price I can get John to say 1. So what's interesting is that classical economics says John should say yes to $1, but in every culture around the world he says no, even though he's $1 off better than he was. And the reason he says no is because he thinks it's unfair. So we actually have this whole thing about fairness. Now, if Susan says 50-50, in every case, every culture, every time around the world, John would say yes. If she says 60-40, there's a kind of belief Susan's got the power, it's her $10, it's not mine, that's okay. 70-30, you start edging into the no territories. And this has been mapped, and what we know is there are cultural influences about this. So there's a mixture between nature and nurture, but in general, we have a wiring. And the wiring comes out of evolution. So a very interesting thing. We evolved, human beings, as we came out of the Neolithic, in groups and tribes and clans. And you would survive much better in a collaboration with others than you would alone. We're going to talk more about evolution throughout this discussion.